Florida now has 21.3 million residents, permanent residents. You overlay that with all of our second homeowners, who knows what that number is, but it's a much larger number. 21.3 million people. We're the third largest state in the United States behind California and Texas. More importantly today than ever is that we're one of 7 states that does not have a state income tax. So if you're not from this country, we pay our federal income taxes, but then some states also have a separate tax. And we do not have another tax. So one of 7 states that does not have a tax, so we have become a magnet for other states that have taxes to come here. Some other states like New York and California and others can be as high as 13% additional income tax. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. When you look at our sales for where we have been this past year, the sales of our over $1 million properties are somewhat different than our under $1 million properties. Our under $1 million properties are really tight in inventory. Our sales in the under $1 million properties in Miami-Dade County are down about 3% in units because, as you heard Lawrence say, we have not been building new single-family homes. In our marketplace, we don't have a whole lot of places to build anymore because we've built on most of our land. Condominium sales in Miami-Dade County are down about 1%. In Broward County, similar looking numbers. Single family is down about 1% in sales. These are under $1 million. Over $1 million sales in Miami-Dade County are up 18%. So we've had a huge boost in our sales and the number of sales for over $1 million properties in both Dade and Broward counties. Condominiums are up 16% in sales. Broward County single family sales in the over $1 million market are up 4%. And sales in the condominium market over $1 million in Broward County is up 27%. The median price of a single-family home in Miami-Dade County right now this morning as we're sitting here together, $369,000. That's up 8% from last year. Condominiums median price are $230,000, up 5% from last year. In the under $1 million market, single-family, the under $1 million market in single-family homes in Broward County are down 1%, and in Broward condos are up 4%. So as you look also at the number of renters, there was a lot of discussion in Lawrence's presentation about how many tenants we have versus how many buyers. Right now in Miami-Dade County, we have 40% of all of our transactions every month are now buyers, and 60% are tenants. So we have really moved the needle heavily toward the number of tenants. So if you take all of our transactions, buyers and leases, people buying or leasing property, you put all those into a bowl, you take out the ones that have leased, it's about 60% right now. Sales are about 40%. In Broward County, it's about 50-50. But if you go back to the days of the recession, our sales had fallen to about 35%, and then renters were about 65%. Part of that is because we have just built some wonderful rental properties. If you're an international broker here today that has been helping us sell to your customers from other countries, they love the fact that they can invest in a property here and have ready-made tenants to rent them, and that is still very strong for us in most of our condominium markets and in some of our single-family markets as well. So we have a healthy market for renting these properties. As you saw, though, in the lower price ranges, many of our buyers are having a more difficult time buying today because interest rates are higher, and our lower price buyers are typically more in need of financing than some of our higher prices. So with that, just to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about, let me tell you who's going to be talking with you today. I am Ron Shuffield. I'm with EWM Realty International, and we have these panelists. Jay Parker. Jay Parker is the first person sitting right here. Jay is the CEO of the Florida brokerage for Douglas Elliman Real Estate. Jay's responsible for 1,000 agents working from 18 Douglas Elliman offices between Miami and Jupiter. Is that still correct? 20 offices now, thank you. He also holds a law degree from the University of Miami. In addition, he serves on the Board of Governors for the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce and is president of the Executive Board of the Mount Sinai Medical Center Foundation here in Miami Beach. And most recently, Jay was invited to be a member of the Forbes magazine Real Estate Council. Okay, and next to him is Nancy Corey. Nancy is South Florida Regional Vice President for Coldwell Banker Real Estate Brokerage. Nancy's family's real estate brokerage company was a predecessor to Coldwell Banker here in South Florida. The name of their company was the Clock Company. And she oversees 1,900 agents working in 20 South Florida Coldwell Banker offices from Delray Beach to Pinecrest. Is that still correct? Okay.
Correct.
All right. And next to Nancy is Anthony Graziano. Anthony is an MAI appraiser. We all rely on him in the development community and the brokers community to give us accurate facts and statistics. As an MAI appraiser, they provide commercial real estate market research, valuation, and advisory services across the United States and the Caribbean. Anthony also serves as a senior manager director of the Miami Palm Beach office of Integra Realty Resources, where he is the chairman of the national footprint of that. And he's widely recognized in our market and across the country as a leader in the analysis of not only South Florida real estate, but other real estate in New York and other places. He's been involved in the real estate industry since 1986, when he began his career in New Jersey with Atlantic Coast Realty Advisor Group, which was a predecessor to Integra Coastal. Thank you, Anthony, for being here. And last but certainly not least is Christina Pappas. Christina Pappas' family owns the Kai's Real Estate Company. And they have 50 offices, give or take an office or two, and about 3,000 agents from here to Martin County up to
Smyrna Beach.
Smyrna Beach, okay, all the way up to the middle of the state. And Christina is a third-generation realtor and Miami native. She began her real estate broker's career in 2011. She's the 2017 past president of the Residential Board of Governors of the Miami Association of Realtors, which is our group that's hosting this today. Is currently the 2018 secretary of our Florida Realtors Association and serves on the National Association of Realtors leadership team. We're so happy to have each one of you. Thank you very much. And now,
So Ron, before we get started,
yes.
So basically on this top brokers panel, just to frame this for everybody, with a soccer analogy, this is Messier, this is Ronaldo, this is Kane, I'm the referee. Just black and white stripes.
Hey, I love it.
I just keep score, and I don't manage 1,000 agents, so I just keep
love
score.
it. That's right. We were billed today as the big brokers, which is true. Each one of our companies is large, and I love the analogy. Thank you.
And then you threw
perfect.
the scorekeeper in.
That's right. All right, so you're in a soccer match today. All right. Well, Anthony, let's just start with you. You know, we've heard just a minute ago Lawrence talk about bubbles. Our industry has been using this term ever since I've been in this business for 40 years, I guess. And, you know, there are a lot of different definitions of a bubble. So, you know, some of the headlines are reporting that, you know, our markets may be softening. We saw on the West Coast, he had some numbers there that were pretty significant decreases for the West Coast of the United States. But, you know, the South and kind of where we are in Florida, I mean, it's still pretty strong. But when people start hinting about a bubble, what's your definition of a bubble, and how do you suggest that we respond to that statement? Because we get asked that by a lot of people, and if you're a foreign broker here with us today outside the United States, this is this is something you should listen to, because your customers back home are going to be asking, what do I hear about happening in Florida? And now you're going to hear it from the guy who knows better than any of us. So, Anthony.
So actually what I heard was Lawrence evade the question of the bubble. The question over here was that Schiller had signaled a bubble. I will say this. In our framework, we look at it this way. You know, the term bubble goes all the way back to the tulip fiasco in the Netherlands, right? So the crash of the tulip crash in the 1700s, that's a historical context of it. But the concept of a real estate bubble is when there's an artificial impetus, an artificial factor that's driving that pricing up. And all of a sudden that gets taken away, and the concept is that you get a big crash. It pops, right? The bubble pops. So a lot of the people in the media talk about a bubble, and they sort of mean, is the market back to peak? Is it getting too hot? Are prices going to reverse? And everybody's kind of using this bubble terminology. Oh, there's another bubble, because it creates a headline. It creates some urgency. Is something wrong in the market? Is there something we don't see? But you know, whether we're in a bubble or not really depends on what your perspective is as to whether or not there's any artificial factors in the economy. And I think what we heard Dr. Yun say this morning is that there really are not any fundamental factors that are artificially inflating the value of real estate. Now, I will say that, you know, there's a tremendous amount of monetary supply, right? Monetary supply worldwide has grown, and so the economy as a result has expanded, and part of the inflation factors is that there's just more money in the marketplace. But that being said, you know, the money is being properly allocated. There's not over leverage, as we talked about. We're adjusting interest rates to account for the growing economy to slow it a little bit because asset price appreciation has been growing at faster than the rate of the economy. So as interest rates come up, that rate appreciation is going to slow. And we're in that period right now where things are adjusting and moving within a normal market mechanism. So, if people ask you, are we in a bubble? I think that the stock answer should be, not unless you think there's something artificial happening in the economy. I don't think we're in a bubble. I think what we're in is a normally functioning price correcting market. And that being said, a lot of people look at peak and they say, well, we've surpassed where we were before. Well, we should have surpassed where we were before because we're 10 years on from where we were before. So theoretically, for us to even compare what was happening in pricing in 2006 to current, we should be 30% more, assuming 3% per year appreciation. We should be at 30% more in pricing if we were on par. So I would suggest that, we're not in a bubble. There's no artificial impetus currently. We're just in a period of price correction.
Okay.
I would agree with you, Anthony. I also think it's important to recognize what the variables were that drove us into a bubble in the last recession. We had a market where new development was being basically motivated or stimulated by low threshold deposits, 5% deposits, the ability to flip contracts, the ability to basically drive in anybody and everybody who could possibly come up with a 5 or 10% deposit into the real estate game. That to me is artificial. If they can't afford to buy the product, they should never have the opportunity to put up the deposit. And so that was one variable. And then we also had the global economic crisis where banks were lending more money than they could even afford to lend, where people were not qualified to take the loans that they ended up taking, and it created a bubble, it created a burst. Today's market, we don't have the same type of investment scenario. We don't have people throwing down 5 or 10% deposits. Developers are required to have 20, 30, 40, and even 50% deposits. So if you can't afford the product, you're really not able to sign the contract. So that's one variable that's been eliminated. And then of course you have a much more sophisticated financial environment. Banks are making loans, but the loans that they're making are based upon qualification. So you're not able to get that loan unless you're able to pay it back. So that's eliminating another variable that's avoiding the bubble. So I think all in all, we're in an economy today that's driven by fundamentals that are supporting the growth of our market, and I think they'll continue to do that.
Yep.
I think what's interesting about the whole scenario is the stability that we've enjoyed, because when you talk about an artificial entrance, when you talk about the Russians coming in and buying a great deal, the Brazilians were here, and then when they departed, it was replaced by domestic activity, and all of a sudden we had all this interest from the United States in the domestic arena. So what I'm looking for is the overall fluidity and the stability of the market, and that's what always makes me feel very comfortable that we're not there. As long as we don't get it in our heads, and as long as we don't bring down consumer confidence as it relates to housing, I think we're a very, very resilient city, and we're a very resilient industry.
This leads us to, and Christina, I'll ask you this question, and it looks like you don't comment on that, but you can probably weave this together with this. If you look at the profile of our South Florida buyers since the recession, so from 2008 to 2018, so over this last 10 years, that's about the length of time you've been in our business. So how have you seen the market profile change over this last 10 years, and whatever changes you've witnessed, what are your buyers placing their value on today?
So I think it's similar to what Nancy said. I think that we're to take a line from my father, I love Miami because it's so close to the States. And I think that we have that international feel where everybody feels like they're home when they're here, regardless if they're from the Northeast, from California, or from somewhere international. Everyone feels very, very much at home. And so through that time period, over the past 10 years, we have had a lot of ebb and flow, and a lot of that is based on the volatility of other countries. And so we often say if there's something volatile happening in South America, people want to leave and take their money somewhere safe, whereas the U.S. is always going to be a great place to invest your money. If the economy is going very strong in a South American country or in another country, people tend to have a little bit more money where they're coming in here investing. And so we have seen, we used to be a lot of the, we still see a lot of Venezuelan and Brazilians buyers with the volatility that's occurring there. But now, like Nancy said, we've seen a huge shift to the Northeast. And I think that has a lot to do with the tax reform that was recently passed. In our Palm Beach area, we're seeing some of our high-end buyers being only from New York, New Jersey, Delaware, where you're going, there was a tax reform that was passed, and you're going to lose a lot of those tax benefits being from there. So this idea of 6 months and a day to live here and have certain tax benefits, I think we're going to continue to see that when people start filing their 2018 taxes and really feel that effect. I'm not sure everyone has realized it yet, And so while we saw a shift from South America, we saw a big influence. I think it was probably around 6-7 years ago from France, actually, right around when we started doing the International Congress. We saw a big influential come in through France, and that was probably during some of their turmoil and their volatility in their country. And so I think Miami always benefits, and it does shift, but we're really seeing now for us in our markets, especially in the higher end markets, a majority of our buyers are coming from that Northeast. And they look a little different and they act a little different than from international. Like Lawrence said, they don't spend as much money like our international friends do.
Hold your thought for 2 seconds. I'm going to throw a stat out here. 3 years ago, from the numbers that our realtors were giving us, about 42% of all of our sales in Miami-Dade County were made to someone from outside the country. So this is over $1 million. So over $1 million 3 years ago, 42%. Pretty hard to believe that 4 out of every 10 sales we were making as a group were made to someone from outside the country. As Lawrence's numbers kind of reflect, we also fell back on the international side. And so today it's about a third of our buyers, still a huge percentage based on the number of buyers coming from outside our market, but about a third of our buyers are coming from you, our international friends, and I think that will continue. But now that I've said that, anybody else want to comment on what she just said? Yeah.
The other interesting issue is what I call the demographic advantage. I mean, we are in such a fabulous time because my parents still live in a sprawling condo. That's what works for them at 90 and 92 years old. My generation is right-sizing, so we're not necessarily downsizing to something smaller. Then you have the XY generation that are forming families and they're buying bigger homes, and then the millennials are starting to hit where they're starting to form families. So when you look at the sheer numbers of people that are buying, when you talk about supply and demand, I mean, the demand is there just because of the sheer numbers of people. I'm fascinated by the fact that all these condos were here and everybody said, oh, we're going to have this big problem. And I thought the developers were very smart. They did what I call quiet the cranes and just, settled down, didn't get too excited about it. And little by little, all of this gets absorbed because there's just so many people.
I'd like to add to that. I agree with everything that's been said. We also have to look at one of the largest sectors of our population being the baby boomers. And those people are now starting to reach ages of retirement or empty nesters. And there was a natural progression for people from all over the country to destinations like South Florida that offered lifestyle. So in addition to the tax benefits, in addition to this maturation and sophistication of our entire South Florida market, we also have this growing number of people that are relocating, or at least planning their relocation to Southeast Florida and even Southwest Florida. And I think all of those things combined create a perfect storm for us, which I think will help us to eliminate the type of bubble that we faced in the past.
Anthony, let me ask you this question. We've talked a lot today, we're talking a lot everywhere we go today about the millennials. The millennials have finally come of age to start buying. Millennials in this country, most people kind of look at somewhere between 22 and 37 years old today, even some difference of opinions on that. But if you look at the baby boomers, about 75 million baby boomers now in the United States. It's the largest largest generational group that we have. So as you look at those, what does your research indicate? Where are those people buying? Are they buying in greater numbers? Is it increasing? And you got to be careful because you're sitting next to one of them.
I'll correct you.
Okay, you tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong. So, it's interesting. In the United States, we break up our demographics in generations. And we think of, when we do that, as economists, we look at those generational trends and we generally tend to put them in about 15 to 20 year age groups. So if you look at the baby boomers, as you mentioned, Ron, they were built around the time, they were born around the end of the Second World War, and that baby boomer generation sort of grew up and prospered in the 50s and 60s, graduating high school usually in the 1960s. And that was a big bulge. When everybody came back from the war, we had this big bulge. That was the definition of the baby boom. And subsequent to that, we've studied these generations. Well, an interesting thing has happened where the millennials didn't really, when we defined the millennial generation, we started talking about it in the 1980s. And so Gen X, which is my generation, tends to end around 1980. And then we started to talk about the next generation, the millennials, those that were going to be of adult age by the year 2000. We continued that forward, and then we started to talk about people that were born in the year 2000 and were then going to reach adult age sometime thereafter. And so what happened is this discussion in the economic circles about millennials and in the media has expanded from our normal 15 or 20 year generation to now being almost a 40-year generation, ranging from 1980 to sometime in the early to mid 2000s, up to 2010. So that's almost about a 30-year generational gap. So what's happening is now we have this group we're generalizing about, but they don't have a common ethos. This is a very large demographic group. We say all the millennials are going to make up the largest segment of the working population in the United States. Yeah, no kidding. It's almost 2 full generations. So I say now we have elder millennials. And so what's happening, those elder millennials are now reaching into their 30s. They're more established in their careers. They grew up at the dawn of the digital age. Most of them don't know what a record player is, but they certainly know what a CD is, even though you can't find one today. You've seen one, right? You might have heard about this thing called a VHS.
Those I remember.
But the concept is, though, is that this elder millennial generation is now reaching a level of maturity and success, and so their patterns and buyer behaviors are really changing versus the younger millennial generation. So what we're seeing is the older ones are heading out into the housing market. The younger ones are still renting and establishing their careers. But we have this broad generalization. I can tell you from experience, though, we started saying the millennials don't want to work hard. They're used to everything coming easy. We make these broad generalizations. They don't like to work. It's a super productive generation. Very, very technologically savvy, very focused on work and understanding that they want to get ahead and that the world is an expensive place to live. So a lot of the early the generalizations about millennials I don't think have borne out. And I think what we are seeing as they mature over this next 5-year cycle, they are going to play an ever-impacting role. But I think it's going to be a shift away from multifamily and more into single-family home buying.
Christina, where are they buying?
I'm going to take you with me whenever people talk negatively about millennials and say, hey, no, Anthony said.
I'm a big fan of the millennials.
I think, though, it depends on what generation you're talking about. But for the most part, you're seeing a lot of the younger home buyers, if they have families, they're looking for that urban core, but with still some sort of privacy. So you might see them in our Coconut Grove area or Coral Gables area. But one thing to remember about millennials, and everyone forgets, is they grew up watching their parents who worked super hard lose it all. And so they have become very, very conservative in what they are looking for and how they're buying. So some of their they were in college when their parents said, I can't pay anymore. I mean, they had to move back home, help their parents out. And so they come from this very conservative mindset. And so that's actually sometimes the people I hear saying there's a bubble. And that's because they're seeing these prices get very expensive. They're seeing the interest rates start to price them out, and they're going, there's a bubble because it's so expensive. I shouldn't have to spend this much money on my home. And so I think there is a little bit of that dichotomy of what actually they can afford, where they want to live and play, because they do like that work hard, play hard lifestyle, which you're actually seeing a lot of baby boomers move towards as well. And so now they're fighting baby boomers who have significant savings and retirement to spend in that area versus a younger family who wants to come in, and you're pushing and pulling on that supply and demand in some of those areas.
Okay. Let me ask you about the Asian market. We've been talking about the Asian market across the world for many years now. Miami has not seen, at least up until this point, a lot of Asian buyers, but we are beginning to see more. We're beginning to see more Asian people in our community. When we look at the airport, when we talk to our airport here in Miami, it sounds like, while they have not made a commitment, it sounds like that we may see some direct flights to Asia within this next year, in 2019. What do you sense the potential is of Asian buyers in our market once we get those direct flights? Jay?
Yeah, I think airlift always has a significant impact on market accessibility. So I think when there are direct flights from those markets, I think it's going to be more appealing. The duration of the flight will play a factor. The price points in this market and the opportunity for investment will be appealing. If you compare the other major markets that typically those buyers have gone to, California and New York, those prices have exceeded ours substantially. Even though the New York market has retracted slightly over the last year or so, it's still grossly more expensive than our market. So I think it will take time. We've been talking about that market for a long, long time, hoping that they would recognize South Florida. But I think ultimately it'll play a role, and I think we'll see increased volume coming out of those parts of the country, out of those parts of the world, like we have with Turkey. When Turkey started direct flights into Miami, we saw more and more Turkish buyers looking at us versus California or New York. So I think it'll play a role. I ultimately think it's going to depend upon how well we receive that market, how we adopt to their cultures and provide them with a comfort zone. So I still think it's an opportunity. I hope we will capitalize on it, but I still think it depends heavily heavily on air transport.
Nancy, I want to ask you a question about this same idea, where these people are coming from. But before I do that, I want to give you a stat from our public school system in Miami. Our public school system in Miami-Dade County is the 4th largest school system in the United States. We have 345,000 kids that go to a public school. We have a lot of other very fine private schools as well. So a lot of education goes on in this town with elementary schools all the way up through college and graduate work. So those people that have been coming here for so many years from other places gives a good, the schools give a good picture of the diversity of our community. Out of those 345,000 students, they were born in 171 different countries. And again, I grew up in Tennessee. I didn't know there were 171 countries when I was growing up, but 171 different countries. And when those kids go home in the afternoon, they speak one of 106 other languages or dialects as their first language. Wow. So I would argue that Miami may be the most diverse place on earth. When people get off a plane here, no matter where they're from, they seem to feel at home. They find their food here, they find their culture here, they find their language here, they find their religion here, they find their friends here. I remember when the Iron Curtain fell several years ago, the first place that Hungary opened a consulate was in Coral Gables, right down the street. And so I was involved more with the Chamber of Commerce at that time, and we had a ribbon cutting, and I said, gosh, you know, you have New York, you have Washington, D.C. I mean, why did you choose Coral Gables as your first Hungarian consulate once you had the freedom to do that? And they said, well, it was very simple. We already have a Hungarian social club in Miami that has 1,200 members. Now, go figure. But anyway, that's the diversity of our marketplace. So now, with that little prelude, Nancy, are you seeing any changes in the countries where your salespeople are bringing buyers from? I mean, where are you seeing, what countries are you seeing?
I think it's more diverse than ever. We get a lot of inquiries in from Turkey. We've had a lot in from Italy. We have a surprising number in from Italy. We had a huge delegation that came into our international gathering that we had, and they were from India. We're really seeing them from a lot of different places, hearing some real positive noise coming out of Brazil and some parts of South America. We still have a good, strong base coming from Canada. I think the Asian population has always been here, but in very small numbers. I think it's in that 3 to 7% range. We have a lot of investment by Asians in commercial, and in our community, I liked what you were talking about before, Jay, because we really don't have the proper infrastructure. We have Caracasitas, we have Sunny Isles, we have all these different areas, but do we really have the strong infrastructure for the Asian community to feel really comfortable? Probably not yet. So I think as that continues to develop, we'll get more traction from there. But I think the most important thing is it doesn't really matter where you're from, you're always going to be comfortable in the city, always.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've seen some, I mean, just in the past year, over a 2-year time span, a group of Japanese investors purchased over $50 million worth of properties in duplex, triplex, fourplex, so all residential, but all over the Doral area just for investment. And one of their investors says they started a company here to help Asian children go to school here in our schools and then get into good American colleges. And so they are seeing our education system as a great system. I think we thought with the dredging of the Panama Canal, we were going to get a lot more, but I think with the direct flights, we saw, I think it was Houston, when they got direct flights, their whole economy changed with Asian buyers, and I think that will change here.
To showcase our transparency, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about sea level rise. No matter where you are on the globe today, you're hearing about sea level rise and environmental issues. You know, we've had something called red tide mostly on the west coast of Florida, but a little bit on the east coast of Florida. But, you know, things that do affect buyers' decisions about where to buy. What does anybody can take this question, sea level rise, any other challenges that we see from an environmental standpoint, how will that affect us going forward?
All right, I'll jump in. Okay, I think we're a very resilient city. I remember years ago, there were on the news, it was nonstop Sweetwater. Sweetwater was just, you know, buried in water. And then Sweetwater figured it out with some pumping systems. I used to drive down Alton Road and there'd literally be a wave that went from my car up onto Whole Foods and kind of arched over and came back at my car. I mean, it was that significant and serious there. They raised up the roads, they put in a pumping system. We're working very hard. I think what's important to understand about sea level rise is it's not our problem here exclusively. It goes all the way up the coast to New York, it's all the way up California, it's obviously in the Gulf of Mexico, so we all have to pay attention to it and we all have to do those things to adapt. And one thing I love about our city is we do adapt and we move really quickly and we are responsive and we don't just sit back and watch those things happen. I think we're in good shape. I think we're going to continue to work with those things. I watched what happened in the red tide on the West Coast. There was a couple of deals that were lost because of it, because every once in a while you run into one or two people that get nervous, but it didn't take out the entire market. It just didn't. It was just a few, key sales, and everybody gets nervous about it, and then all of a sudden in comes a hurricane, it washes it up, and off we go. So.
We felt red tide actually in Palm Beach this year for the first time, and I think we felt a little bit of that, just uncertainty amongst consumers of what it is and what it means for the market if they are investing in a location where they want to get their value out and their money back. What does it mean? How often? And those types of things. I think education is key. We need to understand what we can do. What is Miami Beach doing with rising sea level? Where can we get involved and really help make sure that we are playing? I think height is going to matter quite a bit. I think you're going to see a lot of those changes as the Panhandle will see building code changes. I think we'll see code changes as rising tide changes. But we are a resilient city, and I think it's more, and I think water quality is going to be the topic of conversation in 2019 at Congress and locally. And I think that as long as we can get them to take action and you get educated, we are resilient.
I would add, I don't think we have seen yet any material impact on pricing or values in South Florida as it relates to these environmental issues. I think anybody that would negate the importance of focusing on these issues is just foolish. But I can also say that, as Nancy points out, and Christine points out as well, resiliency, if you look back to where South Florida was when Andrew hit us, we were decimated. And it was a point in time where we really didn't have anywhere close to the hurricane preparedness structures and strategies and awareness that we do today. Many years later, we are the gold standard, not only in the United States, but globally for hurricane preparedness. And we've seen hurricanes hit the United States all over the place in markets that they've never, ever threatened before. I think we have the intellectual capital domestically, globally, and I actually think we will become a leading force in addressing sea level rise and other environmental issues that face us. The difference is that today we're aware, we're not ignoring, we're focused, and we're determined to overcome. And I really do believe, like I think the rest of our panelists do, that we will find resolution to these issues. I mean, we put men on the moon. We can figure out how to solve this problem.
Let's move to traffic. Everybody has experienced our traffic in South Florida. Bill Talbert, who is the head of our Convention and Visitors Bureau, always says, tell me one major city in the world that does not have a traffic challenge. And I think that that's probably true I think he's correct, that's probably true all across the world. But when we think about traffic and how is that changing where we're selling people? I mean, are people trying to get closer to where they need to be? Just a couple of comments. Anybody have comments on traffic and how we're dealing with that?
Okay, so traffic is horrible. We have to admit it. I mean, it's just terrible. I had the most wonderful comment from my grandson because he was getting close to the age where he was going to get a driver's license. And I said, God, can't you wait to get your driver's license? I couldn't wait to get my driver's license. He said, Grandma, we Uber.
No, that's true.
I mean, it was just amazing to me. So I think we're going to see a transformation in that. I'm seeing less parking being made available, and then people will have to adapt. I see more people gathering in one place to go into one car or sharing an Uber to get to different places. So I think you're seeing a lot of changes there. There's more bike racks up. There's more scooters. I think that, this concept of live, work, and play in one place is really important to all of us. I was looking for walkability myself on my last move. I want to be able to just get out and walk and go wherever it is I want to go to. And these buildings that provide all of that together, I think they're remarkable, and I think they're very efficient and they're very attractive. So
yep.
I think once again, we don't have a choice. We're going to have to adapt, and we will.
I think we'll wait for like 10 years and no one will be driving, right? We'll be flying around in hovercrafts or whatever it is. So I'm waiting for that.
Yeah.
Everybody's predicted that for so long. I'll take a little bit of a counterpoint. Here's the reality. Americans generally are tied to their cars, right? And so we have never built the infrastructure to be pedestrian friendly. We have been in Miami-Dade making tremendous efforts to improve our bicycling and our cycling connectivity around the county. But we also face a reality. It's beautiful today. I'd love to walk outside in a tie and it's perfect. Last week, you wouldn't have caught me in a tie. I wouldn't have even worn a tie today, probably. So we talk about walkability and pedestrian friendly and all that. Well, that's nice, but not in June and July. So that's one challenge that we have. But overall, I think what we're seeing internationally is there are cities that are saying no cars in this area of the city.
Right.
And I do think that Miami will reach a point where that's happening. I also think that we are starting to see businesses locating in areas proximate to where people are living. And so we've seen a lot of migration into downtown Miami, and that's largely been driven by our concentration of offices and people saying, you know what, I don't want to live in the southern part of Miami-Dade County and travel downtown because that's an hour to go 7 miles. Traffic is also relative, right? So our traffic is bad in United States standards if you live in the suburbs of the United States. But if you go to New York or you go to LA, our traffic is actually quite mild. And if you got on an airplane and go to Sao Paulo, I mean, we look like we live in the rural area of the world. So I think that getting Americans to get out of their cars is going to be a challenge. I don't think it's going to happen. And the danger that we have and that we're facing right now, in my opinion, is that the politicians are afraid to build roads. And that in and of itself is a duplication of the problem, because we have an existing traffic problem, but there's a theory that says if we build more roads, then people won't get out of their cars. So let's not build any more roads, which then makes the existing road infrastructure more taxed. And so the theory is, create enough critical traffic that it forces people out of their cars. And I think that's where we are right now. From a historical context, though, I will tell you, in the late 1800s, New York City had a major problem. New York City's problem was that there were so many horses in the city. There were 7 horses for every person that lived in New York City. And there was so much manure that it was an environmental hazard. And by the early 1900s, when the car was invented, everybody hailed the car as the greatest invention in the world because it was going to solve the manure problem, and it was going to be the car was going to be environmentally friendly. So I sort of agree with Jay. I think a combination of our technological innovations will help solve traffic and some of these other issues, and more importantly, we have an opportunity to become leaders in this area and figure out how to solve them, because we're experiencing them really, first within the top 10 metros in the United States. We're first leaders.
Okay, let our audience now jump in here. We're down to about 15 minutes here, so we want to wrap up with some comments at the very end. But anybody in the room have a question? Anybody? Ding, ding.
I'd love to hear from people in the room how their buyers and how the people in their country view Miami as an investment generally, and how they view the United States.
Got one over there.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
This jail.
My name is from Brazil, from São Paulo. My question is, there was a perception, or there is a perception, that the millennials do not want to buy, they want to rent, they do not like property, or that perception was in the past. Now, I don't know today if this perception is still valid. Is it changing, or that trend is still valid?
Well, I think it is changing, because as they age and decide to have children, living in 600 square feet is no longer acceptable. But I think Christina's right. I think the effects of the 2007, 8, 9 recession, where a lot of people were losing their homes, the banking failed. We were on the brink of a global banking failure. This was very equivalent to like the Great Depression. So from a mental, psychological standpoint, these kids were getting out of college and entering a job market where they thought unemployment was going to go to 12, 13, 14%, and the United States wasn't the only place. This was happening all over the world. So I think it's very much, my grandfather was born around the Great Depression, and I walked into his closet one day in the 1990s, and he had 75 cans of coffee in the closet. I said, why so much coffee? He says, because during the Great Depression, coffee was rationed, butter was rationed, and sugar was rationed. And I can do without sugar and butter. I can never do without coffee. For 80 years, the guy collected coffee. So I do think it's changing, but I think it's going to take some time. I also think, too, as prices have come up on residential real estate, I think it's been harder for them to afford the down payment. I think garnering enough money to be able to make that initial down payment has been also somewhat challenging. But I do think it's changing. I don't think it's a matter of preference. I think it's an economic decision that they're making.
I think, to his point, in being of that generation that went through college when all my friends were offered jobs, and then the jobs were taken back halfway through the year because, well, the economy downturned and just kidding, we don't have anything to offer you, and so kids were forced to go back home. That volatility has also led people to say, I don't know where I'm going to get my next job, so I may need just to rent for now because I may have to travel. And if I lose this job, what do I do? And so I think that's where you saw a little bit of people people saying, I'm just going to rent because I don't know where I'm going to be able to get employed, and I think that was a big factor. And I think there's a slide, Lawrence is in the room, but if I'm correct, I believe the average age of the first-time home buyer has stayed the same for the past 30 years, and it's 32 years old. And I think the conversation around millennials has just become what I like to say, kind of the conversation around disruptors, like the old drinking game. But I do think it became so conversational because we also had the huge, people are strapped with student debt. And I think when you attach student debt to somebody and you ask them to save money for a huge down payment and you have a little bit of the rising prices in theirs, you're going to have some of that worry behind, do they really want to buy? But no, I'll tell you, the sentiment is that they view home ownership as a very positive thing, and it's something that they want to achieve.
I think they're really important to watch because I don't think you can really typecast them. I met a young man the other day that's been living at home, and he owns 3 investment properties. Smart kid. You know, he's at home and he's collecting, you know, properties while he's there. And I think that generation is very interesting. You were talking about closets. You know, I was thinking this morning that, you know, a lot of young people may not want that storage because whereas we might have put coffee or paper products in it, they'd rather have a piece of equipment because they've got, you know, shipped. They've got all this stuff that's Amazon's coming to their house every single day. They can get whatever they want in 2 hours. So you really have to pay attention to all the different things that they want and that they need that are different because they're going to have a huge impact on everything because there are so many of them. So they're fun, they're interesting, and we need to watch them because they're absolutely going to change the landscape.
Okay, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you. And if you have more questions afterwards, we'll be up here, so you can certainly come up here and ask. Each one of us is going to have about a minute and a half, you know, to comment on just our outlook for the remainder of this year and into 2019, and what indicators should we be watching. So while you're thinking, let me tell you what I think. I think that we will continue to see more sales next year. Prices, I think, are going to continue to be on the soft side. You know, Lawrence said that too. You know, probably half of the percentage increases that we've been experiencing this year. And the reason for that is just supply and demand. You know, I think the number one metric in our business is the number of months of supply that we have. We'd like to have in the under $1 million market somewhere between 6 to 9 months of supply. We're comfortably in those ranges. Condos are a little bit higher than that, but we're comfortably in those ranges for single family and condos. But when you get over $1 million, we need to stay somewhere within a 12 to 18 month supply. Right now, in the over $1 million market across both counties, we basically have almost 2 years of supply for single family and 4 years of supply for condos, which is representative of the number of condos that we've been building. You get over $5 million, we have about 5 years of supply for condos, about 350 condos on the market right now in Miami, over $5 million. In the over $1 million market, we've been experiencing a sale price is somewhere about 84% of the original asking price. So we have a lot of great inventory. Our sellers are very realistic on price today. So this is the time, I think, as Lawrence again looked at those graphs. I love what he had here today. And if you didn't remember that, he was showing that we will continue to see appreciation. It may dip a little bit, as it always does through these cycles, but over the long term, everybody sees the U.S. as the safest place to put their assets. And we have a lot of domestic buyers that are now moving here to either rent or buy this product as well. So I think that we probably don't really have any understanding of how many more people are coming to Florida. We right now are growing at the rate of about 365,000 people a year. That's about 950 to 1,000 people a day. So by the time the sun sets tonight, when we're having a good time somewhere, we're going to have 1,000 more people that are setting up their permanent residency in Florida. About 30% of that population lives just in these 3 counties, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. So you have about 6 million people living just in these 3 counties out of the 21.3 million in the state. So now, hopefully you've had a chance to think about something. So Jay, start with 1.5 minutes roughly.
Yeah, briefly, I think it's important that we talk about tax reform and its impact on the Florida market. We have seen, as the largest real estate company in New York City, we've seen a tremendous amount of migration from New York and also from California, and I think that's having a very significant impact on our market. I think there are a number of indicators that are pointing towards the success for the South Florida real estate market over the next year to year and a half, but I think notably tax reform will continue to be a very powerful factor, especially in that high price point category. Every single day we're meeting new people that are looking at South Florida Florida, moving to South Florida, and bringing their companies to South Florida. So I think as opposed to what we've seen over the last 20 some odd years, where there is this migration here, but ultimately we see a lot more people buying second and third homes, we're now seeing more and more families relocate. And ultimately when you get that ultra high net worth individual bringing his company here, it's not just him buying the multi-million-dollar property, it's his employees, and then it's all the people that follow, the restaurant employees, the new restaurant companies that are coming here, all the services that are ancillary to that person's lifestyle that are now all focused on South Florida. We'll wrap up by looking at restaurants. If you just take a look at the new restaurants that have come into the South Florida market over the last few years, there are dozens from New York. And why is that happening? Because they're providing a landing strip for their clientele, for their people, for their families. And I think that will continue to boost our economy. So bullish.
I think we're very fortunate, and I really want to address our friends that have come from the international markets. I think we're a very price-sensitive market, maybe not more so than other markets, but I think it's very important that you connect with a local real estate professional and really begin to understand things, because we have a very diverse market. If you're talking about a property on the intercoastal versus Biscayne Bay versus the ocean, you really do have to understand all those factors. And then the second thing that we have is a lot of people look at it as an investment, and I think we've done very well because overall we do increase over the number of years. But the other factor that we have is just a great place to live. I mean, the sun's shining all the time. We have great shopping. We have great weather. We have sporting events 365 days a year. So we have just a magnificent lifestyle. So that combination of being a great place to invest and also a great place to live really is what makes our market so attractive and so sustainable.
You want to skip me so I can go last?
Okay, so you can counter all of everything.
Well, no,
we're
I don't want to
saying.
take your ideas.
No, it's good. No, I mean, we're with Jay. We have to be bullish on the market, right? Every year we're bullish on the market no matter what. We have to be. But I think that not on top of tax reform, as you see our millennials continue to be a topic of conversation as they grow their families, or as my father would say, as he hopes for more grandchildren, I think you are going to, I think that we are going to see quite a big shift in our marketplace just with your growing your older millennials, growing of age and retirement homes. I think we're going to start seeing a shift of that as Northeasterners come down and look for that community style. Where are they going to end up? What parts of the town? And like Nancy said, to really understand, sometimes it's a tale of two cities, but we're looking forward towards a lot more absorption of our condos. We're not seeing a whole lot new builds coming on the market. You'll hear from the new construction panel soon, but we're really looking forward to some more absorption there, some really great pricing, and really educating our tenants and our buyers that, hey, while Miami is an expensive city, it is nothing compared to some of the other great cities around the United States. And you can live in Miami for a quarter of the price that you can live in New York City, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And I think continuing to get that message out and focusing on some of our any environmental issues, I think will make it for a great 2019.
Hey, so I think we really need to get Major League Soccer to Miami so that our friends from South America can come and laugh at us about how poorly we play soccer.
Right down the street from me, wonderful.
But that being said, the overall backdrop, and I'll say this for all our international friends in the room, Miami has been establishing and building its cultural identity on the backs of immigration for the past 35 or 40 years. I think it favors us in the context of the United States. We're a very melded and unique place, and the rest of the United States, in my opinion, quite frankly, is quite bland and homogenized, right? Everything is sort of the same as you travel around the U.S. As globalization has taken over, the United States has become somewhat the same in many, many other areas around the country, and I don't think that that's the case in Miami. I think Miami has a lot of the best because we've been open to immigration, and notwithstanding our presidential position and maybe some of the radical fringe that you see, I can tell you this is a very open community, and I'm very excited about being here. It is a good time to buy. I think if you look, historically, we have always traded in international buyers as a big portion of our economy, but in a lot of ways, that was always flight capital. There really wasn't a fundamental desire there for appreciation. It turned out that the appreciation worked out really well, but a lot of people brought their money here thinking, well, I'm going to park my money here, and this way it'll always be there, and it'll be denominated in US dollars. That is shifting, and my firm did a study over about a 40-year period on the average rate of appreciation of land in Miami, and that number is about 7.5% compounded annual growth rate over 40 years. So when you look at the safety and security and the cultural institutions and the wealth that's already here, I think Miami has a great long run. But if you listen to Ron's stats, as fast as they were, what you're hearing is based on current absorption. And I know all the reasons, right? We have currency issues. We have a very strong dollar. We have uncertain global economies that are changing. But the Canadians, the Europeans, and to a greater extent the South Americans will be coming back. And once this inventory burns off, we talk about today a 5-year supply on the basis of how much we're selling every month right now. But once that number doubles, we're selling twice as much, that 5-year supply goes to a 2.5-year supply really quick. And we saw that happen in 2008 and 2009. Everybody said, oh, it's going to take 10 years for us to sell all this inventory. And by 2011, we were like, hey, we got to start building again. Right. So what I'd leave you with is this. It's a good time to buy. Pricing is not at peak, certainly not in bubble territory. It is still stable, but there's enough inventory that between selection and opportunity to negotiate, it is a really good time, I think, to be looking, provided that your currency and other economic outlook is positive. And so I would encourage you to do that, and I thank everybody for listening. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for traveling from your city to come to our city. We love newcomers and people to be our friends from other places. We have so many opportunities now to meet people from all over the world from living in one place. I have 3 children that are all grown now, but they have friends all over the world from just growing up here. So there's plenty more room left for more people to come. Teresa and Deborah, thank you guys for putting this together. This is, how many years you've been doing this?
24.
24 years, and I mean, every year it just gets stronger and stronger. The people you bring to share with us is, the people that are coming to participate and the people that are sharing with us are the top in the world that I go to, all the meetings that I see. But thank you to you ladies, because you all have done a fabulous job. And panel, thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you.
And I mean, the knowledge you have is invaluable. Thank you.
These are big brokers, aren't they incredible?